This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and once again, it's Smackdown time. Now, this one will probably start some wars in the comments section. Guys and gals, be nice to each other, because what do we have here? We have the 2015 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display and dedicated AMD graphics. And here we have the top-of-the-line Dell XPS 15. This refresh happened in 2014 for the Dell XPS, but in 2015 they went with the 4K option for the high end, so that's actually kind of new here. Both of these have quad-core, full 28-watt CPUs, mobile workstation level performance from the CPUs here, dedicated graphics. Dell goes with the last generation graphics that were in this Mac, though, so there's an interesting thing. Anyway, a lot of things in common, including very high price tags. We're going to compare them now. So here we have it. Two, well, basically silvery topped laptops, 15-inch size, 15.6 inches for the Dell, 15.4 inches for the Mac, 16 by 10 aspect ratio. Apple likes that, not quite as widescreen as the Dell, which is why the Dell is a little bit longer going that way, usual 16 by 9 aspect ratio, so no black bars whatsoever when watching video, but you do get a little more screen height on the Mac when doing just about everything else. Both of these are quite expensive. Now, it gets a little more complicated with the Dell. There's always some complication, isn't there? We're talking about the 4K model, the upper end model for the Dell here. There is a 1080p model, which is still a perfectly acceptable resolution, especially given how the scaling thing with Windows 8.1 is just not everything it could be. You know, you can get some fuzzy text sometimes or micro small text. Anyway, that one starts at $1,600, so that is a whole lot more affordable. But the 4K models start around $2,150, and our model is the highly configured model, which is $2,550, which is actually a little bit more expensive than the dedicated graphics version of the 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display, which is $2,500 for dedicated graphics. It's $2,000 if you're happy with Intel Iris Pro graphics. With the Dell, you get standard dedicated graphics no matter whether you go high or low, and that's a pretty appealing thing. Now, the less appealing thing is it's running NVIDIA GT 750M graphics, 2 gigs of DDR5 RAM there. Not that NVIDIA is bad. NVIDIA makes very nice graphics processors for laptops and for desktops, but that's 2 generations old at this point. We really had hoped, Dell just sent this unit right here, so it's the newest thing they have, that they would be jumping to do a little upgrade there, maybe a 9 series like the 950 or something like that. They haven't. The outgoing previous generation of the 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro had the same graphics inside, so they were really on par, but Apple, with this 2015 model, just updated to AMD Radeon R9 M370X graphics, 2 gigs of DDR5 RAM again. So yes, this does clock faster. No, for those of you who want to play Windows games, you don't get those special NVIDIA optimizations for some games. Can't have everything, but it is a bit faster. We'll talk about some benchmarks later. So that's one of the ways that Apple is going to pull ahead. When it comes to weight and thickness, these guys are both very close at 4.5 pounds, so incredibly light for very powerful 15-inch laptops. The Dell, as you can see, is actually, even though their specs claim it's thinner, you know, the Mac is 0.71 inches, the Dell is actually a little bit thicker all the way around, but they're both very, very slim machines, especially for 15-inch, again, pro-level machines that have fast quad-core CPUs. Speaking of quad-core CPUs, both of these have Intel Haswell 4th generation CPUs. Do not blame Dell, do not blame Apple. Intel has not gotten quad-core mobile Broadwells ready yet. We don't even know if manufacturers are going to bother at this point. And the big difference between Haswell and Broadwell really was some power savings with the 5th generation Broadwell chipsets. So in terms of computing performance, you're not losing much. You do get a little bit of a boost with the integrated graphics, 7%, 10%, maybe at best there. So it's not the end of the world. Anyway, they're both going to be running Haswell here because that's all that is available. Both Core i7 quad cores, you're looking at similar computational capabilities here. 16 gigs of RAM is standard for the 4K model on the Dell XPS, and the base model you can get it with 8 gigs of RAM. 16 gigs of RAM on the MacBook Pro 15-inch model. That is soldered on board. That's not upgradable. You can't get it with less, so you don't have to worry about upgrading it, and Haswell can't address Haswell laptops more than that amount of memory, so even if you had RAM sockets, you couldn't go farther. Talking about RAM sockets and such, you know how it is with Apple. You don't want to even open this thing up, let me tell you, unless you're a qualified service technician, and you know me, I take everything apart just about and show you the internals of these things. Just about no point with the Mac. Everything is soldered on, and lots of stuff is glued in place. The multi-cell battery setup and all that sort of thing. You can upgrade the SSD if you can find one that actually matches for the PCIe SSD that they're using in here, but nothing else. The Dell is more like your good old-fashioned laptop of old, even though it's like Ultrabook size. You can take off the bottom and you can watch our full review and you can see a picture of the internals in there and look at our written review where we have a photograph as well. So, bunch of Torx screws here, another 2 Phillips head under the little service tag door right there. Take it off. You can remove the battery if you ever need to replace it because it's gotten old and dreary and doesn't hold a charge anymore 2, 3, 5 years down the road. 2 RAM slots, standard RAM slots, and you have your mSATA SSD in here and your socketed wireless card. So more serviceability for the Dell, more upgradability for the Dell. Dell takes that point. Also, one thing I will say, both of these can get kind of hot and you'll hear the fans revving up. Fast quad cores in 15-inch laptops, that's just the way it is. If you think these are noisy, try out a gaming laptop. Wow, that can really impress you with the noise. Although sometimes those don't get as hot because all of that noise means you have big fans exhausting through lots of vents, exhausting that heat. With these designs, it's a little bit harder. Dell has, obviously, air grills here, air grills over here. It helps also that we have carbon fiber, so carbon fiber doesn't feel as hot as metal will on the bottom. It still gets hot, it still gets noisy if you're doing like something like playing GTA 5. Not if you're doing Word, Excel, not if you're streaming Netflix video, not if you're doing normal things like that. But it can get toasty. Now our Mac, in the interest of clean design, Apple is not too big on putting ventilation here, but with the Retinas, they did make a concession to design, and we have some air vents on each side to help with ventilation a little bit, and then also along the back of the display hinge area here, where granted it is a little bit blocked, but it has a curve angle, so it kind of blows it up out of the display. This too will get hot if you're doing something like playing GTA 5. Both of these will not get burning hot if say you're a video producer, like, well, we happen to do all the time. You're exporting 1080p and even 4K video, 10-minute video, something like that. You'll hear the fans come on, both of these. Definitely you will, but it's not going to be at their loudest pitch, and they're not going to get frighteningly hot. So we're talking about crazy things, again, mostly gaming. Those of you who are trying to use these for CAD, for example, CAD 3D modeling and rendering can really get things hot. Hottest point on both of these, going to be sorted towards the center here. Both of these have measured up to about 113 degrees when doing things like playing games. Otherwise, they don't really get that hot. Metal does transfer heat more, so you'll feel a little bit more on the Mac. On the keyboard side, now our Dell does not get so hot on the keyboard. With the Mac, a lot of the heat radiates right up from the keyboard, so that can be a little bit less than fun if you're trying to play a game and you notice your fingernails are curling up. No, it doesn't really get that hot. So a little hotter on the keyboard area here. Neither of these is violently hot. Neither of these, honestly, is intended to be a gaming laptop. We have things like the Razer Blade, the Alienware, the MSI gaming laptops for that sort of stuff, and of course others as well. The graphics in here are mid-level graphics for a reason. These are considered slim, portable, professional, mobile workstation kind of things for you guys who do video editing on the go, do a lot of Photoshop work, you're in the graphic design space, you're compiling lots of code. That's what they're designed for. And now here they are from the side view. You know, aesthetically speaking, I leave this up to you as to which you like better. These are both very attractive, well put together high-end machines. Both of these have you've got your beautiful aluminum top going on here, obviously with the Dell carbon fiber on the bottom. Inside you have that magnesium alloy palm rest that has the black soft touch finish right there, whereas the Mac goes with all aluminum everywhere. The Mac's a little simpler and cleaner looking. The Dell, I would say, it's a little bit flashier. You got that kind of shiny chrome going on the side. But again, it's up to you. They're both really nicely put together. So how about ports? A little easier to see because we are just straight silver over here. The ports on the side of the Mac. We have our headphone port. We have a USB 3.0 port. We have 2 Thunderbolt 2 ports, which also act as display ports, and that's our MagSafe charging connector. Now on our Dell here, we have, same thing, a headphone mic combo jack right there. We have 2 USB ports 3.0. We have 1 mini display port. We have full-size HDMI, and that's the traditional power plug, and that's just a little button you press to see your battery status right there. On the other side of the Dell, but wait, there's more. 2 more USB ports, another 3.0 and one that's a 2.0 sleep and charge port. So 4 USB ports total, twice as many as the Mac. SD card slot, and that's your lock slot right over here. On the other side of the Mac, we have the SD card slot, we have the full-size HDMI, we have our second USB port. So in a USB-centric world, the Dell XPS 15 would win for ports. If you are more of a multi-display person, you will probably like the Mac a little better. You got 2 display ports there plus HDMI, or if you're living in the Mac camp and you have a Thunderbolt display, obviously you can use one of those to drive a Thunderbolt display. Thunderbolt plus DisplayPort, a little bit more versatile, but there are not a lot of affordable Thunderbolt peripherals still there. So how about displays? Both of these are 15-inch class machines and 15-inch displays. Retina display on Apple, that's their marketing term for a high pixel density IPS display. Both of these are glossy displays. Both of these are quite reflective. I know often Apple claims that they are less glare prone. Believe me, we have to position this just right to avoid glare just as much as with the Dell, if not a little bit more. 2880 by 1800 resolution here, which is a perfectly high resolution. And as you can see, we have the same picture going on. And the Dell uses a Sharp IGZO panel. Sharp IGZO panels are pretty bright without using too much power, but they have very high color saturation. And you can see the difference right here. The colors are going to the point of blooming there. You're losing some detail because the colors are amped up so much. Now, this is a calibrated display, so in terms of color balance and hue, you're seeing the right thing, but the saturation is higher. You might actually want to dial that down if you're a professional photo or video editor, but every day anybody else is probably going to say, well, that's pretty, it's a whole lot of colors, but you can see a little bit of a loss of clarity with IGZO. One nice thing about IGZO panels is they are very power frugal, and of course this is a 4K display, so it's even higher resolution than the Mac is. It has 3840 by 2160 resolution. Another important thing also, this is a touch screen, which for Windows, it makes it more enjoyable, easier to use, all that sort of thing. Mac OS doesn't even support touch screens, so there goes that. But for those of you who are thinking about dual booting and running Boot Camp on the Mac, keep that in mind. If you like the touch feature in Windows, you will not get that in any current Mac model. Me personally, which display would I pick? I would pick the Mac because clarity, sharpness, and detail are real important since we do a lot of photo editing for Mobile Tech Review and for, obviously, video editing too for the YouTube videos you're watching right now. In terms of brightness, both of these are around 300 nits of brightness. They are both running at maximum brightness right now with auto brightness turned off. So they're both quite bright displays and they're both similarly bright. They both have wide IPS-like viewing angles. Now how about the keyboard and the trackpad? The Mac has the new Force Touch trackpad, which means if you press it, you'll feel it clicks and moves in each corner. It's not hinged at the top and only moves at the bottom. And if you press and hold deeply, you'll feel a secondary click, and that can be very useful for things like getting a preview of a link. If it's a web page, for example, or getting a definition of a word. I'm sure more things will come up right now. Under Mac OS, you know how it is. Mac trackpads are just the best. It doesn't make me want to pull my hair out, which some Windows trackpads do. If you're boot camping, then the Windows drivers are not stellar like the Mac OS drivers because, well, does Apple have much of vested interest in you enjoying Windows on this machine? Not enough to really kill themselves over trying to make the drivers as good. So it's a much more average kind of experience under Windows. And generally speaking, I don't recommend buying a Mac if you primarily want to run Windows. If you want to run Parallels or you need to boot camp in once in a while, you want to play some games or use some Windows-only software, sure. But as a primary operating system, given the fact, particularly with these guys that have the dedicated graphics, you're not going to get the power management, you're not going to be able to run on integrated graphics if you wish to, so it's just not good as a primary Windows machine. But anyway, back to the keyboards. Both of these have lovely keyboards. People praise them. I personally prefer the Dell keyboard a little bit more key travel. They're both backlit. They're both nice and tactile. Dell has a little bit of a shape to the keys, sculpted, so it feels pretty good. My choice. I think either way, you're going to enjoy the keyboard on these. The trackpad is your average Dell trackpad, which is to say it's not bad. It's not up to Mac OS 10 Yosemite standards if you're running Mac OS, but as it goes under Windows, it's okay. It's fine. It gets the job done. It supports multi-touch features. How about out-and-out performance in terms of benchmarks? Again, both of these quad-core i7s. Our Mac happens to be the highest-end model. It has a 2.8 gigahertz, so it's a couple hundred megahertz faster than the Dell. Beyond that, so you'll see a little bit difference in the Geekbench scores because of that, but it's just because this happens to have the higher-end CPU configured on it, or higher clock speed CPU. For Geekbench 3, our Mac scored 3953. For the single-core test, 15,143, which is a new personal best for the machines that we've tested for Geekbench 3. Dell XPS scored 3262 and 11,836. Chalk that up to the higher clock speed CPU by a little bit, and also the newer graphics in the Mac for possibly having an influence, so Geekbench should be more CPU bound than anything else. Uni-Engine Heaven, the Heaven test for gaming, 1080p resolution test. The Mac with the AMD Radeon R9 graphics scored 35.5 frames per second on average, whereas the Dell XPS 15 with the NVIDIA GT750M scored 21.1 frames per second. So obviously a difference there for those who are wondering if the new AMD graphics in the 15-inch Retina MacBook Pro really are faster than the GT750M. Well, certainly I would say so. For 3D Mark 11 in the performance mode, the Mac scored 3975. Also for 3D Mark 11 on the performance test, the Dell scored 2977. So who's the faster performer there in terms of graphics? Well, it is the Mac. So how about sound levels? We're going to play the same video for you, both running at 75% volume altogether. And I'm going to put my wireless microphone in the middle so you can hear each of these. Now the Mac has top-facing speakers, which seems like a very brilliant design, and it certainly is, so it comes right at you. Might expect an advantage of there, but let's listen and see. Alrighty, so let's play on the Dell first. This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and ThinkPad fans, you're going to be excited because finally we have the Lenovo ThinkPad T. It's not bad at all. It's certainly quite loud. It's pretty full, maybe a little bit muted sounding. Now the Mac. This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and ThinkPad fans, you're going to be excited because finally we have the Lenovo ThinkPad T. Mac is not as loud, but it's a little bit clearer, where the Dell sounds just ever so slightly muddy. That's maybe how it gets its bass tones. So let's go to max volume for a minute, because I know some of you just asked for max volume. All right, back to the Mac again, 100% volume. 50S, this is my guess, is the latest generation of the Lenovo T series, and the S variant, which means it clear, maybe a little bit of treble sibilance there, which means harshness. 450S, this is my guess, is the latest generation of the Lenovo T series, and still a little bit more bass oriented on the Dell, a little bit louder overall. I would say it really depends on which you prefer, the thinner but crisper sound of the Mac, or the sometimes a little bit muddy but louder and fuller sound of the Dell. All right, lastly, how about battery life? Both of these have particularly large batteries, especially given the fact that they are slim and light laptops. Apple goes for a little bit more watt hours there. They got 99.5 versus 91, but that's real close there, so I wouldn't call that a significant difference. Apple now claims 9 hours of battery life for the Retina 15-inch MacBook Pro. And Dell, well, they're doing a lot here. They're driving a 4K display. The higher the resolution of the display, no matter what, you're going to use more power. Both of these obviously hope for those battery life claims that you're using mostly integrated graphics. Both of these have switchable graphics, and the system will switch depending on demand automatically. So if you ramp up Photoshop or Adobe Premiere or something like that, it will kick in the dedicated graphics. You can override that if you want for battery life when you're on the road, when battery life is more important than performance to you. Anyway, on average so far we have managed 8 hours on a charge, doing mostly productivity use, not hitting the GPU a whole lot, doing some Adobe Photoshop work on our Mac, and that's about it in terms of really taxing the GPU or bringing it into play very much. Streaming video doesn't really on either of these kick in the dedicated graphics. With the Dell XPS 15, under the same usage scenario, more like 6 hours. So Mac wins on battery life there by a couple of hours, doesn't it? In terms of chargers that you'll be bringing along, neither of these is particularly burdensome. This is the biggest version of Apple's Square charger right here. This is Dell's charger. Obviously the Dell has a longer footprint, but it is also slimmer, so I think either way these are not bad, especially for these kind of laptops. Once you see something like the power supply for the HP Omen 15 or the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro gaming laptops that are thin and light, you'll say that these are just a joy because they're so small. While we were talking about that display resolution, by the way, one thing to factor in here is that, you know, the Retina display on the Mac started this whole craze for Windows laptops going for very high resolution displays, and they can be very useful and enjoyable for things like Adobe Photoshop. If you're running Adobe Photoshop CC, that actually has scaling for the UI stuff that goes around there, so you don't have absolutely tiny tools that you need a magnifying glass for. Video editing as well, but Mac OS X handles display scaling universally for all the programs and for the operating system itself, excuse me. It works. You're never going to see tiny text. You're not going to see fuzzy text. Now, if you have a program that hasn't been updated to be Retina aware, the stuff won't look quite as sharp. It'll look, you know, kind of like a non-Retina Mac would look. And if it is a Retina updated program, which is most of the major programs, it's going to look keenly sharp. With Windows, you know the story. The higher the resolution, the more often you're going to run into either dialogues that haven't been updated from programs where the text is really teeny. If you're using older versions of Photoshop that don't have that beta 200% UI scaling, you're going to have absolutely tiny tools surrounding your otherwise lovely photo. Something to keep in mind. Hopefully Windows 10 will get that under control, but we're still really dependent on third-party programs getting on the bandwagon there. So which of these would I pick? Well, for me personally, neither. I would love to have either of these, but these are a little bit rich for my taste. I really do sweat blood if I spend that much money. That's just the way that I am. I would be torn, though, I can tell you that, because for work I do use a Mac, and I really appreciate the quad-core CPU here versus my 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro when it comes to things like exporting video and editing video in general, some of those power user tasks that I do. With the Dell, I appreciate the upgradable internals, more serviceable parts, a keyboard that I actually like better. So each of these, you know, they're the same price, so it's not like you're saving any money. Each of these has their merits, and it really depends on which operating system you want to run primarily there. My personal pick, I ended up with the MSI GS60 Ghost Pro, because for under $2,000 you get an NVIDIA GT 970M, and I do like the game. A really nice keyboard with zone backlighting, just as thin as light. Nice machine too. Not as pretty as either of these though. You know, MSI just does not have the styling of the Dell XPS line, or the Mac certainly, but I know you guys always like to know what I would pick. So there it is. The 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display 2015 edition, and the latest generation of the Dell XPS 15, well, updated with the 4K. It's still the carbon fiber on the back here. Both of these very expensive machines. They probably cost more than your first car. But for those of you who have the money and need mobile workstation performance, well, these are two of the most nicely made, well-appointed laptops you can get. As I pointed out, and this never gets old, I'm going to keep saying this, it really depends if you want to run Mac OS. If you're a Mac person, it's going to be the Mac. Or if you're more of a Windows person, I would strongly suggest you get the Dell XPS. If you're on the fence and you can go either way, then it becomes a tougher choice. But there's a couple of hardware features in favor of the Dell, like the upgradable components on the inside, the even higher resolution display, which has its caveats running Windows 8, getting a little bit better with Windows 10, but you get the idea. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video reviews of each of these products, read our written reviews on mobiletechreview.com, and hit that subscribe button.